My name is Evelyn Parker, and the moment my father lifted his glass and declared in front of 50 people that my daughter-in-law wasn't blood, so he left her out, something inside me snapped so loudly, I swear, the whole backyard should have heard it. I was standing there with a gift worth millions papers. I had spent months preparing documents meant to secure my family's future. And in that single moment, I knew none of them deserved it. Not the ones laughing, not the ones looking away, not the ones pretending they didn't hear him, and certainly not the man who raised me. But before I ever tore anything to shreds, before the yard went silent, you need to understand how we ended up at that party on that warm Indiana afternoon. It was late June, one of those Midwest days, where the air hangs heavy and the mosquitoes come out early. My older daughter, Kara, had just closed on her first house, a tidy little place with a wide porch, the kind of home where family photos go on every wall and porch swings are expected. She was proud. The whole family was. And despite everything we had been through over the years, I was proud too. That's why I came early to help set up. I brought flowers from my garden, peonies, hydrangeas, and those tall purple ones everyone forgets the name of. I arranged them in mason jars, because that's what Kara liked. I wiped down tables, laid out food trays, and even ironed the tablecloths she borrowed from her mother-in-law. I did what mothers over 60 have done for generations. I showed up quietly and completely. And I brought the envelope. It was tucked deep inside my purse, sealed heavy with legal weight and emotional truth. Those papers were the final step in a decision I'd made months before to divide the assets my late husband and I had built over a lifetime. Savings, investments, the lake cabin we renovated, board by board. Even the mineral rights on a little patch of land my father never believed would amount to anything. It turned out those rights alone were now worth a small fortune. All of it was supposed to be shared, equally, fairly. My girls didn't know how much I had, and I wanted it that way. I'd planned to reveal the trust once everyone was together, maybe after dessert. A sweet ending to a sweet celebration. But things rarely unfold the way we imagine them, especially in families like mine. As the party started, relatives filled the yard, uncles with beer bottles, cousins chasing children, neighbors who'd heard about the celebration, and stopped by with store-bought potato salad. It was chaotic in the way only big Midwestern families can be. People hugged too long. People talked over each other. People laughed loudly. And then my father arrived. At 84, he walked slower, but talked just as sharp. He'd been a steelworker for 40 years, a man who believed toughness was the only virtue worth respecting. He'd always had favorites, starting with my older sister, then moving on to Kara. I'd spent a lifetime being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who doesn't need anything. He still introduced me that way. When he stepped into the yard, people straightened up. He liked that. He always had. Kara came rushing over Grandpa. Come see the house. And he let her drag him around like a prized guest on a tour. The rest of us followed, listening as he praised everything, the new hardwood floors, the shiplap, accent, wall, the kitchen island. Everything she'd chosen was perfect. Everything she'd done was smart. And then it happened. We returned to the backyard, and someone handed him a microphone. Lord knows who. He tapped it twice, raised his glass, and said, "Let's toast to Kara's new home and to real family. Blood, the people who matter." There was polite laughter. I felt my stomach drop. Then he added louder, And I'll tell you right now, a daughter-in-law isn't blood, so I left her out. Laughter exploded across the yard. Except for one person. My daughter-in-law, Lily, had just stepped outside, carrying a tray of lemonade. She froze, mid-step, her smile, collapsing the tray, shaking in her hands. She had been nothing but kind to this family. She took care of my late husband when nobody else did. She brought dinners to me during the winter storms. She visited my father more than Kara did. But she wasn't blood, and that was all he needed to erase her. I felt heat crawl up my neck, not anger clarity. The kind that arrives only after a lifetime of being minimized, dismissed, or told to stop being sensitive. I saw everything at once, the favoritism, the years of emotional labor, the unspoken expectation that I would support everyone financially, but remain silent emotionally. For the first time in decades, I felt a boundary take shape, solid, cold, and unmistakable. Lily set the tray down and slipped inside, wiping her eyes. My father looked pleased with himself. People kept laughing, though more awkwardly now. Some glanced my way, then quickly away, as if guilt could be avoided with a simple turn of the head. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the envelope. The weight of it, the meaning of it, the truth of it. I walked to the edge of the yard, my back to the crowd, pretending to adjust something on the table. But really, I was breathing, slow, steady, deliberate, deciding. And in that moment, I knew. They didn't deserve what I'd come to give. Not the money, not the property, not the cabin, and not the future security I had built through decades of sacrifice. I turned back toward them and took one step, then another, feeling the decision settle into my bones. What happened next would change everything. The morning after the party, I woke up earlier than usual. That tends to happen when something inside you shifts. Overnight, your body knows, before your mind does. I made coffee, sat at my small kitchen table, and stared out the window toward the maple tree my husband Robert planted 22 years ago. The sun hit it just right, lighting up every leaf. It reminded me of the life we built together, one slow, steady decision at a time. And of how quickly people forget what you've done for them. I kept replaying the moment in the yard, when my father dismissed Lily as if she were clutter in the corner. I'd watched her smile crumple. I'd watched her quietly wipe her hand under her eye, hoping no one noticed. I noticed. I always noticed. That wasn't the first time my family treated her like a footnote. It was simply the first time I couldn't stay silent anymore. Lily married my younger daughter Emily 12 years ago. They were high school sweethearts who managed to grow into adulthood together, something rare these days. Emily had always been the quieter one between my girls, steady, thoughtful, and tender-hearted in ways that reminded me of myself. Maybe that's why my father never clicked with her the way he did with Kara. In his mind, softness was weakness. That old-fashioned steel mill mentality never left him. But Lily filled in Emily's cracks with warmth. She checked on me after every doctor's appointment. She sat with Robert during his chemo rounds when I needed a break. She organized our pantry during the winter storms and never once posted about it like she was doing charity. She saw people. She really did. And yet the family treated her like an accessory. I took a slow sip of coffee and thought back to the years when everything started shifting, long before the party, long before the trust papers. When Robert died, it was Lily who showed up at my door every Saturday morning with a grocery bag and a list of things to help with. She cut the grass without being asked. She fixed the loose hinge on the back gate. She handled calls. I couldn't handle paperwork. I didn't have the energy to read. My girls grieved too, but Lily carried a quiet kind of strength that steadied the rest of us. My father barely came to the funeral. "I don't like hospitals or funerals," he'd shrugged. That was his excuse. That was his explanation. He left early and never mentioned Robert's name again. But he had plenty to say about Kara's remodel, Kara's job promotions, Kara's new dog, Kara's Christmas decorations. She was the golden one. She always had been. She basked in it too, not cruelly, just comfortably. When life hands you favoritism, you don't question where it comes from. You just enjoy the sunshine. Meanwhile, Emily and Lily were treated like polite guests in rooms they had every right to belong in. I didn't realize how deep that wound went, not until I began reviewing my finances last year. It started with something simple, a bill I found from an old roof repair. One thing led to another, and suddenly I was digging through decades of paperwork, tax returns, old bank statements, investment summaries. A lifetime of frugality and careful planning stared back at me in folders labeled with Robert's handwriting. When I added everything up, our savings, the investment accounts, the life insurance, the lake cabin, the mineral rights, we weren't just comfortable as I'd always described us. We were wealthy, quietly, responsibly, and almost accidentally wealthy. I remember sitting at the same kitchen table, just like I was now, with the calculator in hand, and tears pooling in my eyes, not because of the number, but because of what the number represented: a lifetime of sacrifice, of skipped vacations and coupon clipping, of patched-up shoes and hand-me-down coats for the girls instead of new ones, of Robert working double shifts even when the chemo made him weak. We built something, he and I, something real. And I wanted to share it with the people who had treated us with respect, with kindness, with love. But as I looked back over the years, I realized the list was much shorter than I'd imagined. For years, I'd contributed to family emergencies, helping Kara with her down payment, paying off her medical deductible that one winter she broke her ankle, covering my father's property taxes after he forgot 3 years in a row, funding birthday parties, holiday meals, school clothes, car repairs. And every time I told myself, it's fine, family helps family. That's what my own mother taught me, even though she rarely followed her own advice. But Lily, she helped me without ever expecting a penny. When Emily got sick 2 winters ago, Lily slept on my couch for days, so they wouldn't burden me. She shoveled my driveway before going to work. She warm-wrapped my pipes during that brutal freeze that shut our town down for 3 days. She never bragged about any of it. She never complained. She just showed up. And the night before that party, while I ironed tablecloths and packed the floral jars, Lily texted me, "Do you need help? I can come early." She always asked. She always offered. And my father still thought she wasn't family. The injustice of it burned down my throat now, as I remembered the sound of his voice at the party, the self-satisfied tone, the laughter surrounding him, the way people shrugged as if his words were harmless. I opened my purse and touched the envelope again. Even now, sitting alone in my kitchen, with my coffee going cold, I could feel the weight of the trust documents, feel the symbolic betrayal I had almost allowed myself to ignore. That envelope was supposed to be a blessing. But now, it had become a mirror that showed exactly who treated me and my late husband's legacy with respect, and who didn't. Lily knocked on my door around 9 that morning. When I opened it, her eyes were red, but she gave me a small smile. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. I nodded and poured her a cup of coffee. She wrapped her hands around it the way she always did, tight, like it gave her strength. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her. "They did." Her shoulders shook once, just once, before she steadied herself. "Emily wants to apologize," she said. "She didn't know how to react when your father said what he said." I sighed. "Most people didn't." Lily looked down at the table. "But you did." And there it was. The acknowledgement. The understanding. The validation I hadn't known I'd been waiting for. As she spoke, something inside me solidified. Not anger, not spite, just truth. And truth, when it finally arrives, is a kind of peace. I knew then that the revenge I was planning wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about correcting years of imbalance. It was about honoring the kind of love that doesn't come from blood, but from choice. And I was finally ready to act. When people talk about inheritance, they usually picture something tidy, a house, a savings account, maybe a few sentimental things tucked into a cedar chest. But what I held inside that envelope was far from tidy. It was decades of sacrifice calculations, carefully timed decisions, and more restraint than anyone in my family ever knew. I didn't grow up with money. My parents scraped through life, arguing over every bill that hit the mailbox. My father worked hard, yes, but he also spent hard drinks with friends, shiny tools he never used, impulsive purchases that sat in the garage, gathering dust. My mother saved what she could from the grocery budget, pinching pennies, like it was a sport. She used to say, "We don't have much, but at least we have each other." Ironically, she never realized each other sometimes caused the most damage. So when I married Robert at 22, I vowed our life would be different. We didn't need luxury. We needed stability, security, a future. And Robert, God bless that man, believed in building, even if it meant starting small. We bought our first home for $42,000. The roof leaked. The plumbing rattled. The carpet smelled like a wet dog had lived its entire life there. But we made it ours. He patched the roof with his own hands. I painted the walls late into the night. We lived simply, packed lunches, free weekend activities, thrift store furniture. But little by little, our choices compounded. When the company Robert worked for offered stock options, he bought them, even though it meant putting off a vacation. 20 years later, those stocks exploded in value. When I suggested we downsize, after the girls left home, we did, and invested the profit. When his cousin sold that tiny patch of land out west for cheap, Robert said, "Let's take a chance." I thought he was crazy, but I trusted him. Turns out that land sat over minerals worth more than we could have imagined. Every gain was reinvested, every windfall tucked away. And then Robert died, and my world cracked open. But the foundation we had built, the one we poured every ounce of discipline into, remained strong. It grew even, while grief made me feel faded and thin. Before long, I realized I was sitting on a figure larger than most people in our town would ever encounter. So when the girls asked if I needed help financially, I told them the same thing every time. I'm fine. And I was, more than fine. I wanted that wealth, not the money itself, but the security to pass on in a way that honored the life we worked for. That meant equal shares, fair shares. And for years, that was my plan, until bits of truth began to reveal themselves. The first crack came the year Emily lost her job. She cried on my front porch, holding her layoff notice like it was a death certificate. I told her she could stay with me until she got back on her feet. But when I told Kara, she scrunched her nose and said, "You shouldn't enable her, Mom. She needs to grow up." Emily was 32 at the time, hardly a child. But Kara always believed she deserved more. More attention, more praise, more of everything. The second crack came when my father made a joke at Thanksgiving. Something about how Kara inherited all the brains, and Emily wasn't built for much. He didn't say it to be cruel. He said it because he believed it. That's what stung most. And the final crack came not at the party, but months before, when I overheard Kara telling her husband, "Mom's generous, but she's not going to live forever. We'll be fine once she passes." As if my death were a finish line she was pacing toward. I didn't confront her. I simply absorbed the truth. By the time I met with the estate attorney last spring, my mind was mostly made up. Still, I tried to hold on to fairness. My attorney was a soft-spoken woman named Lori. She explained every clause, every option, every potential pitfall. She asked questions no one else had ever asked me. Who has been loyal? Who has cared for you? Who will honor your legacy? Who has shown kindness when no one was watching? The answers came easily. Lily, Emily, my grandchildren, sweet, gentle souls who loved me without motive. But I still clung to the idea of including everyone. That's how families work. Right. Everyone gets a slice, whether they bake the pie or not. So I drafted the trust papers, signed the documents, prepared the envelopes. All I had left to do was present them. And that was the gift I carried into the party. By the time the lemonade spilled and the laughter died down, I finally understood the truth. My gift had been built on the assumption that my family valued me and each other the way Lily did. They didn't. That afternoon, as the crowd milled around the yard, eating slices of sheet cake, I stepped into the shade of a large oak tree and opened the envelope. The papers inside were crisp, clean, lawful, binding. My father's words replayed in my ears like an echo bouncing through a canyon. A daughter-in-law isn't blood, so I left her out. Left her out. So casual, so cold, so easy for him. But for me, it landed like a revelation. The people I had planned to bless were the same people who would watch Lily struggle without lifting a finger. The same people who expected me to be the emotional and financial glue without offering anything back. The trust was not just a formality, it was power. It was my voice. It was everything I had worked for. And I realized, standing there under that oak tree, that giving it to them would only continue a cycle I was finally ready to break. I folded the papers and slid them back into the envelope. The decision I made was not impulsive. It was crystallized truth, forming slowly through years of observation. This wasn't spite. This was correction. This was clarity. And when I stepped out from under that oak tree and saw my family laughing again, oblivious to the way they wounded the only person who ever showed unwavering kindness, I knew exactly what had to happen next. The gift worth millions was no longer theirs. I wish I could tell you the moment felt dramatic by design, that I walked across that yard, planning to make a scene, planning to shock every last one of them. But the truth is, the moment created itself. All I did was stop pretending not to see what had been there for years. The sun had dipped just enough to cast long shadows across the grass. Children were running through sprinklers on the far side of the yard, screaming with the kind of joy only children can sustain. The adults had migrated toward the patio, clustering around the new fire pit Kara was so proud of. Laughter rolled like waves, loud, oblivious, unbothered. And there I was, standing with that heavy envelope in my hand, knowing I could no longer give it to them. I didn't head toward the microphone. I didn't call the family together. Drama wasn't my intention. Instead, I walked up to the patio, slowly, quietly, like someone bringing extra napkins to the table. No one even noticed I was there at first. My father sat in the center, basking in the attention, like a man accustomed to being the loudest voice in any room. Kara was perched beside him, glowing in that effortless, favored daughter way. Emily was on the opposite side of the yard, talking softly with Lily, who kept glancing in my direction, like she was worried about me, worried for me. That alone tightened something in my chest. Someone, the husband of a cousin maybe, called out Evelyn. "You want a drink? We've got a fresh cooler over here." I shook my head. I didn't need a drink. I needed clarity. And I had it. My father saw me then, envelope in hand. His smile widened, assuming, of course, that I was bringing some sort of gift or announcement for Kara. Maybe he thought it was money, or a symbolic tradition, or just something else he could take credit for. He lifted his glass in my direction. "There she is, the woman of the hour, always doing the work, aren't you?" People laughed. They always laughed at his lines. I used to too, before I understood what those lines cost. I stepped closer and held the envelope at chest height. "This," I said, my voice calm but firm, "was for all of you." That got their attention. The conversations stopped. The laughter cut off mid-breath. Even the kids slowed down, sensing something in the air. Kara blinked at me. "Mom, what do you mean?" My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing in interest. "What's that you've got?" I looked around the circle. Faces I had fed, supported, comforted, forgiven. Faces that had taken my generosity for granted so long. They believed it was a personality trait, not a choice. "You laughed," I said quietly, "when you said Lily wasn't family." My father shrugged. "It was a joke." "Funny," I replied, "but you weren't laughing alone." No one moved. No one breathed. I've spent my entire life taking care of this family. I continued falling over myself to keep the peace, to make things easier, to fill in the gaps no one else even noticed. I showed up when you needed help. I sacrificed when you didn't know I was sacrificing. I gave and gave and gave. There was no anger in my voice, just truth, steady and heavy as steel. "And I brought something today," I said, lifting the envelope between my thumb and forefinger. "Something meant for all of you. Something your father and I worked our whole lives to build." My father's eyes lit with unmistakable greed. He tried to mask it, but his reaction was too quick. Kara leaned toward him, whispering, "Maybe it's..." But she would never finish the sentence. Because that was the moment I tore the envelope open, not carefully, not gently, but with the kind of finality that comes only once in a lifetime. The paper slid into my hands. Legal documents, trust instructions, inheritance distributions, signatures, years of planning. I held them out so the group could see them flutter slightly in the warm breeze. And then without a tremor, without hesitation, without even raising my voice, I ripped them to shreds. White strips fell like confetti, soft, slow, deliberate. One piece drifted onto the patio stones. Another caught in the grass. A third landed near my father's shoe. He stared at it as if it were a dying animal. Someone gasped. Someone else covered their mouth. A cousin muttered, "Oh my God." But Emily, sweet Emily, she looked at me with something new in her eyes. Recognition, strength, pride. My father stood abruptly. "What do you think you're doing?" "What you taught me," I said, "leaving people out who don't deserve to be included." His face turned the color of a fading sunset. Kara stepped forward. Mom, stop. You're overreacting. Am I? I asked. Were you overreacting when you laughed at your sister-in-law? When you let her stand there, humiliated, while you said nothing? Her mouth opened, then closed. I'm done giving to people who think they're entitled to my sacrifices, I said. I'm done rewarding cruelty. I'm done pretending. Blood is more important than behavior. Silence fell across the yard, so completely it felt physical, like a blanket pulled tight around all of us. A child asked quietly, Mommy, what's happening? No one answered. I let the last handful of shredded paper fall from my fingers. It floated down in slow spirals, catching the sunlight as it descended. It looked almost beautiful in a strange way, like the ceremony I should have had years ago. A ceremony of release. A ceremony of truth. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't rush. I didn't tremble. I didn't look back. Not once. As I reached the gate, I heard the first voice speak Emily's soft but steady. She did the right thing. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed someone meant it. By the time I got home that evening, the summer sky had shifted into that tender shade of blue-gray that always comes right before dusk settles in. I sat in my car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the quiet wrap itself around me. It wasn't peace exactly, not yet, but it was something close, something beginning. I stepped inside and turned on the lamp near the couch, watching the soft light fill the room. Then the phone started buzzing. First it was Kara, then my father, then Kara again, then a cousin, then another cousin. It was like a chain reaction, everyone desperately trying to make sense of what I had done, not because they cared about how I felt, but because they couldn't fathom losing something they'd always assumed would be theirs. I let every call ring out. After the 10th call, I plugged the phone into the charger and walked away from it. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not that night, maybe not ever. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat by the window, and let my mind replay what happened at the party. While there was a faint tremor in my chest, I realized it wasn't regret. It was relief. And then came the pounding at the door. Not urgent, not aggressive, just steady familiar. When I opened it, Lily stood there, still in her clothes, from the party eyes, swollen, but kind arms wrapped around herself, like she wasn't sure she had permission to stand on my porch. Evelyn, she whispered, I didn't know if you wanted company. I stepped aside and ushered her in without hesitation. She sat on the edge of the couch, running her thumb along the seam of a throw pillow. I'm sorry, she said, voice cracking. I feel like all of this is because of me. I sat beside her. None of this is because of you. It's because of years of behavior that everyone pretended was normal. Yesterday just put a spotlight on what's been there the whole time. She shook her head, but I never wanted to cause trouble. You didn't, I said firmly. They did. Her eyes glistened again, but she didn't let the tears fall. She had a quiet strength to her, a resilience built from understanding where she belonged and where she didn't even when the world tried to tell her otherwise. She asked what the envelope had been, and I told her the truth. Her jaw dropped. Evelyn, that's life-changing money. I know, and you were going to give it to them. I was until I realized I shouldn't. Lily looked down at her hands. Emily is heartbroken. She said everything felt wrong after what your father said. My chest tightened. How is she? She's shaken, Lily said. But she told me she finally saw the family the way you've seen them for years. That surprised me. Emily had always been gentle, loyal, hoping the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. She said, Lily continued, that it's time we stop siding with silence. I let that sit between us. For years, I'd been silent to keep the peace. Silent to avoid conflict. Silent because I thought that was what good mothers, good daughters, good women did. But that silence had cost me pieces of myself, pieces I didn't intend to keep losing. After Lily left that night, I went to my bedroom, pulled out the revised estate binder my attorney had given me, and stared at it for a long time. The trust documents I tore at the party were only copies, preliminary packets. The real documents, the ones that mattered, were locked safely in a fireproof box in my closet. All I had done was tear up the symbolic gesture. But the meaning behind it was irreversible. I opened the binder and flipped to the beneficiary section. At the time, I had listed Kara, Emily, my father, my 2 grandchildren, the local church scholarship fund. Now I saw those names differently. I ran my finger over Kara's name and felt only heaviness. Her entitlement had grown like a slow rot in the family. As for my father putting him as a beneficiary, had never come from love. It had come from obligation, habit, conditioning. I crossed both their names out. It felt cleansing. I wrote in 2 new ones, Lily Thompson Parker, a charitable fund for widows caring for aging parents. Women who gave without being seen. Women like me. Women like my mother, even if she had never claimed her own worth. Later that week, the phone calls continued, though their tone shifted quickly. Shock turned into anger. Anger turned into demands. One message from Kara said, Mom, you embarrassed us. That wasn't necessary. Another from my father said, you need to come talk to me. Families don't act this way. The irony nearly made me laugh. But it was the 3rd message from Kara that finally revealed her heart. You know, we were counting on you. Why would you take that away? There it was. Not sorrow, not apology, not concern for Lily. Just the loss of guaranteed comfort. I deleted the messages. Emily eventually texted, asking if she could come by the house. When she arrived, she hugged me with a trembling sincerity I hadn't felt from her since she was a little girl. She apologized, not for what happened, but for not speaking up sooner. I should have defended Lily, she whispered. You did, I corrected gently. You comforted her. That matters. Emily sat beside me at the kitchen table. She's afraid you're mad at her. I shook my head. I'm not mad at either of you. I'm done being silent. That's different. She nodded slowly, understanding. Then she said something I'll never forget. Mom, you taught me what real family looks like by how you stood up for her. The room felt brighter then. Not from the lights, but from a kind of emotional liberation I had waited years to feel. That night, when the house was finally quiet again, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat on the back porch. Fireflies blinked in the yard. The air was thick with the smell of honeysuckle. I thought of Robert. I wondered what he would say if he saw what our family had become and what I had done. And I swear, in the soft rustle of the leaves, I heard an answer. Good. You finally chose yourself. In the days that followed, my house felt strangely quiet, not empty, not lonely, just calm. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, finally decides to move on. You don't trust it at first. You keep listening for thunder. You brace for lightning. But eventually, you realize the silence isn't a warning. It's a blessing. I woke each morning without the weight I'd carried for decades. No more wondering how to please everyone. No more planning my life around other people's expectations. For the first time in a long time, My days belong to me. On Monday, I planted herbs in the small garden bed, along the back fence, basil, rosemary, mint. I knelt in the dirt gloves, off letting the earth cool my palms. I hadn't gardened since Robert was alive. He used to tease me about how I talked to the plants, as if they could hear me. Maybe they could. Maybe they always had. Midway through planting, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was Lily. She got out holding a casserole dish, wrapped in a towel, the way she always did. Her smile was small, but genuine. "I made baked ziti," she said. "Thought you might want company for dinner." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "You never have to ask." She followed me inside, and we set the dish on the counter. The kitchen filled with the smell of tomatoes and cheese, warmth wrapped in simplicity. The kind of food people make when they care not when they're trying to impress. We ate at the table, the same one where Robert and I once hosted Sunday dinners, where my daughters once did their homework, where I once paid bills late into the night. Over our plates, Lily finally spoke. "Emily told me what you did with the trust." Her voice was soft, cautious. "You didn't have to include me." "Yes," I said, "I did." She shook her head. "But I never expected anything from you." "And that," I replied, "is why you deserve it." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Lily wasn't one to cry easily. She carried her emotions quietly, like little stones in her pockets, always there, but rarely shown. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. I squeezed back. "Family isn't about blood, Lily. It's about who shows up." She swallowed hard, nodding. "I'm here, Evelyn. Always." That moment, simple, unadorned, felt more like family than any holiday dinner or backyard party ever had. Over the next weeks, our connection deepened. She came by often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but time. We cooked together, cleaned together, shared stories about Robert and the early years of my marriage. She told me about her own childhood, her struggles with feeling not enough, her fears about never being fully accepted by Emily's side of the family. "You're enough," I told her one afternoon as we folded laundry together. "You always have been." Around that same time, Emily began stopping by more. At first, she came alone, hesitant, unsure of how to navigate the shift between us. But as the days passed, she opened up the way a flower opens, after a long winter, slowly, cautiously, but fully, once the warmth reaches it. One evening, she sat beside me on the porch swing legs, tucked under her hair, tied back in a loose bun. "I'm sorry for not standing up sooner," she confessed. I think I spent so long trying to keep the peace that I forgot what peace actually feels like." "That's exactly how I spent the last 40 years, I said gently. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I don't want to repeat that." "You won't," I said. "You're already changing." She let out a long breath, one of those breaths that releases more than air. "I didn't realize how much I relied on Dad's approval," she said, "or how much he shaped the way I saw myself. And you." I turned slightly, trying to read her expression. "How did you see me?" Emily hesitated. "I saw you as unshakable, like nothing ever bothered you. I thought you could handle anything, so if I hurt you, you'd just forgive it, move on." She winced at her own words. I nodded slowly. Being strong is different from being unbreakable. Emily's eyes shimmered. "I know that now." We sat in silence, the porch swing creaking softly beneath us. Fireflies flickered across the yard like tiny lanterns, the same way they did when my daughters were little and used to run barefoot trying to catch them. Eventually, Emily lifted her head. "I talked to Kara," she said. My jaw tightened slightly. How did that go? Emily sighed. She's not ready to see her part. She thinks you acted out of anger. She still believes she deserves your inheritance. I swallowed my disappointment. That doesn't surprise me. She'll come around, Mom Emily said. Eventually, maybe not soon, but someday. I wanted to believe her. Whether or not it happened didn't change what I needed to do, now rebuild my life, based on truth, not hope. A few days later, as if sensing the shift inside me, I received a call from the church, asking if I would consider helping with their community garden, the one that supplies fresh produce to widows on fixed incomes. I said yes before letting myself overthink it. On my first day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose, uncomplicated, and pure. The women there were warm, welcoming, and familiar. They worked with their hands and their hearts, tending the soil like a prayer. One woman, Judith, patted my arm and said, "We're glad to have another strong one in the group." Strong, not silent, not convenient, not accommodating. Strong. I carried that word home with me like a seed. That evening, Lily joined me for dinner again. Emily came after her shift. The three of us ate together, laughed together, cleaned the kitchen together. And as I watched them wash dishes side by side, Lily scrubbing, Emily drying, I felt something bloom in me that had been dormant for years. Belonging. Not the kind tied by blood, not the kind expected out of duty, the kind that grows from honesty, respect, and choice. When they left that night, I stood at the door long after their taillights disappeared, listening to the quiet hum of the cicadas. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was holding my family together. I felt like my family, and the version of it that truly mattered, was holding me. Fall arrived early that year. The maple tree in my yard, Robert's maple, was already turning the kind of red that could stop traffic. I stood at the window one chilly morning, cradling a cup of coffee, watching the leaves flutter down like tiny, slow-burning embers. Seasons change, gently, quietly, until suddenly they don't. Families, I realized, are the same. It had been nearly 3 months since the day I tore the trust papers in front of my family. 3 months of unexpected peace, small joys, and slow healing, and 3 months of silence from Kara and my father. I didn't chase either of them. Not out of spite, out of acceptance. People reveal themselves, not in apologies, but in absence. Still, when the phone rang one Thursday afternoon, and I saw my father's name on the screen, something old and heavy stirred inside me. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was weaker than I remembered. Age had finally softened him in ways pride never allowed. "Evelyn," he said, "I suppose you've been expecting a call." "I haven't expected anything," I replied gently. A long pause, then quietly, "Well, I owe you an apology." I sat down at the kitchen table. He cleared his throat. I was raised to believe blood was everything. That family meant lineage, not loyalty. But I watched that video. "What video?" He exhaled. "Someone recorded the moment you tore those papers. It made its way around the family. I saw my face. I saw the way I spoke to Lily, the way I dismissed her. I didn't like the man I saw." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, for all of it." My father had never apologized for anything in 84 years. Maybe the season was changing after all. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "And I meant it." He hesitated. Are you still angry?" I thought about it. The anger had been real, once bright and sharp. But anger burns hot and fast. Truth lasts longer. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "But things won't go back to what they were." He let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. I think that's fair. We spoke for a while about the weather. His doctor visits the house he was finally admitting was too big for him. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, my coffee cold, but my heart unexpectedly warm. Closure doesn't always look the way you imagine. Sometimes it's softer, smaller, quiet like morning frost, melting before you even notice it. The next reconciliation came slower. Kara didn't call, but Emily told me she was thinking about it, turning things over, wrestling with the embarrassment of facing me after everything she'd said at the party. I didn't push. People grow in silence, too. It wasn't until mid-October, when the leaves were already piling against the fence, that Kara showed up on my porch without warning. I opened the door to find her standing there, with her arms wrapped around herself, sweater sleeves pulled down over her hands, the way she used to do as a child when she was afraid. "Mom," she said softly, "can we talk?" I stepped aside. "Come in." She didn't walk far, just to the edge of the living room rug, the way someone stands when they're unsure if they're welcome. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I was awful to you," she began. "Not just that day. I think maybe for a long time." I let her speak. "I took you for granted. I expected things from you that I never should have. I didn't stand up for Lily. I didn't stand up for you. I laughed when I shouldn't have. And when you walked away, I didn't understand why. I was so used to you fixing everything." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, but I watched that video too, and I've been thinking about it every day since. You weren't punishing us. You were protecting yourself, and maybe protecting the family from becoming something worse. Silence settled between us, soft and delicate. "I'm sorry," Mom Kara whispered. "I really am." I walked over and took her hands. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." She looked relieved. "Does this mean things can go back to normal?" I shook my head gently. "Not normal, but better." Her shoulders lowered, as if she'd been holding her breath for months. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt hope for her, hope that she would become the woman she'd convinced herself she already was. Over the next weeks, something unexpected happened. My family didn't collapse. It balanced. Emily and Lily came for dinner every Thursday. We cooked, laughed, planned holiday traditions that felt more genuine than anything before. Kara joined us sometimes, awkward at first, then slowly, more comfortable, like someone learning a new language, the language of humility. Even my father showed up once, Kane, tapping across the porch, holding an apple pie from the grocery store. "Don't read into it," he said. "It was on sale." But I saw it for what it was, a peace offering. A small one, but real. The last night of October, we all gathered for a simple fall meal, chili in a crock-pot, cornbread from a box mix, apple slices with cinnamon. Nothing fancy, nothing orchestrated, just family chosen, humbled, growing. As we sat around the table, I looked at Lily. She was laughing at something Emily said, her face lit by the warm glow of the dining room lamp. She caught me watching and smiled a smile that said, "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me, like a mother loves a daughter." Later, after everyone left and the house was quiet again, I sat alone with a cup of peppermint tea and let the moment settle into me. I realized something. Revenge wasn't what I had done. What I had done was reclaim my worth. What followed was healing. And healing, I learned, doesn't always come wrapped in apologies or tears. Sometimes it comes in boundaries, sometimes in truth, sometimes in the slow rebuilding of a family that almost broke. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and whispered the message I hoped every listener, every older heart carrying years of invisible wounds would remember. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by behavior. And the bravest thing you can do is choose peace with boundaries. If this story touched, you share it with someone who needs courage today. And if you want more stories like this, stories of quiet strength, of justice, in silence, subscribe and stay with me. We walk this road together,